my name is Susanne Evans and welcome to the Change Stories podcast. This is a podcast for people who are interested in creating change, whether that is within organisations or for individuals. In each podcast episode, I will have a conversation with someone about their work to share their story. Each story and conversation will provide you with ideas and inspiration for your own organisation or for you personally. To find out more about each episode, including further reading, and to share your change stories, go to www.changestories.co.uk. Hello and welcome to the Change Stories podcast. My guest today is Alison Jones. Hi, Alison.
Hello, it's good to be here.
Is Director of Practical Inspiration Publishing and host of the Extraordinary Business Book Club, a podcast and community for writers and readers of extraordinary business books. A veteran of the publishing industry, she regularly speaks and writes on the business of books. Former head judge of the Business Book Award, she's written several books herself, including the best-selling This Book Means Business, 2018, and exploratory writing, Everyday Magic for Life and Work, 2022. Alison is passionate about the value of both reading and writing for leaders, and particularly the extraordinary power of exploratory writing as a tool for thinking. Alison, thank you so much for coming on the podcast today.
Oh, it's really nice to be here, Susanne. Thank you for inviting me.
I'm so looking forward to speaking to you because I absolutely love your book. I enjoyed every bit of it. And now that I'm doing more writing of my own, I think it's particularly resonating with me. So this is Alison's lovely book, if you can see it. It's a really great read. For people who haven't read it yet, can you tell me a bit about exploratory writing as a concept and how you got into it personally?
Yes. So exploratory writing as a concept is really just that adjective is there to govern it, to separate it from the kind of writing we usually think about, which is the writing that we do in business all day, every day, for other people. It's that performative writing that we are using to express what we know or think or believe, and we're trying to inform people or influence them or sometimes entertain them. But we are writing primarily to get the stuff that we want to happen out into the world, via getting it through to somebody else's brain. And that is, I think even that, honestly, is underestimated as a skill in business. I think if you can write well, you are streets ahead of somebody who can't write well in terms of getting things done. But exploratory writing is a different kind of writing. And I think it's one that we don't talk about as much. Well, we definitely don't talk about it at school. And I think we don't talk about it in business either. And when people find it, when they're given permission to do it, it can be really transformative for them. And this is the kind of writing you do just for yourself. It's the sort of writing you do when you actually don't know what it is you want to say. and there's no performative element of it at all. So you can sort of say the unsayable and acknowledge the unpalatable and all the things, normally you sort of self-censor yourself so you come across as quite a nice human being. You don't need to do any of that. So you can just start off, and I started with a prompt and come to that, the reason why I do that. But it's really just like, well, what is going on here? What is that? And you just lean into that with curiosity and absolute kind of raw honesty because you can. And it surfaces a lot of stuff. It's the surfacing of stuff that you didn't notice before or you weren't aware of, or the connections that you hadn't seen, or the story that you're telling yourself that actually now it's out in the light of day, you can look at and challenge. But it's also the fact that I think often we think we have to have done the thinking before we start writing, whereas actually when you sit down to write and give yourself a little bit of space and time, that's when the thinking really starts. So that's why it's called exploratory writing, because it's very much about the stuff that you don't yet know, or the stuff you don't know you know.
I love that. And that resonates so strongly with me because so much of my work is that uncovering the hidden that goes on in organisations. My own experience of first starting in that process is that probably about 4 or 5 years ago, I was introduced to the concept of morning pages, where you just sit down in the morning and just kind of go of what's in your head at that moment. And to start with, it felt quite strange. But actually going through the process, and it's still something I do now, it's so freeing. And I think it is that idea that you don't have to show it to anybody. It doesn't have to make any sense. It doesn't need to be grammatically correct. It doesn't need to be neat and tidy. It's just writing what feels right in that moment. And that's so different, exactly as you say, from our experiences in work, but also back to school. You think when we first start writing, that's so far removed from our experiences as youngsters.
Yeah. And you've always got your teacher over your shoulder, literally or metaphorically. Well, you can't use that word. Or is the apostrophe really correct?
Yes.
None of that. But so Julia Cameron is the person who named Morning Pages as part of her The Artist's Way, her sort of 12-week creativity program. And in a sense, that's how I first met free writing as a concept. Very much to do with unburdening your soul, very much sort of first thing in the morning, and very much linked to that idea of creativity. And that's marvelous. And it does work really, really well. And lots of creative people swear by it. What I realized, though, you don't have to just do it first thing in the morning, and you don't have to be doing it to fulfill a sort of creative ambition of yours. Actually, this stuff works in the middle of the workday on a wet Wednesday when you've had an email that's really annoyed you and you can't quite work out why. And I think that's what I'd really like to get across to business people is you might have heard about free writing. You might think it's for writers. Actually, and I only say six minutes of a writing sprint. I don't care how busy you are, you can find 6 minutes. That can absolutely transform your understanding of a problem and your ability to find solutions for it. So I want you to be able to use it as a tool at work as well as a thing that you might want to do if you want to sort of write a screenplay or something, which I think was where Julia Cameron was inventing it.
I think that's a really important distinction, actually, because I don't know whether you have this experience, but so many people I speak to in the workplace say, oh, I'm not very creative. I can never do anything creative. I used to definitely be in that headspace myself. And I think it is important to have that distinction that this isn't about creating something necessarily. It's about doing something that feels good for you in that moment. And something might come out of it or something might not. But it's the process is important in itself, isn't it?
Absolutely. And I think we have a very narrow definition of creativity sometimes. We think there are people who are creative and they do creative arts and there are creative industries. And of course, that's true. And coming up with a new solution to an old problem, that's creative.
Yeah.
Finding a new way of approaching somebody with whom you had a difficult relationship, that's creative. So that, there are these, I was going to say opportunities for creativity. There are these kind of obligations for creativity all the way through our working days. So I don't think it's helpful necessarily to pigeonhole creativity as something that other people do.
And again, I think a lot of that comes back to school and experiences at school where, I'm no good at that. I can't do art. I can't paint, etc. Right. Which creates that view in us, I think, about creativity as being something else that only, exactly as you say, only people working in the creative industries do. No, everyone's creative all the time. It's unlocking that and feeling okay with it being something that's available to everybody.
Yeah. And it's funny, publishing as an industry is a creative industry, and it's shot through with this sort of rank commercialism, because if you don't make a profit, then you've got a business, So it's really, really important that you are a business person as a publisher, and your stock in trade is ideas and creativity and expression of things. And really, you asked how I came upon exploratory writing, and there's a few different things that converged. And one of them was so I'm the director of Practical Inspiration Publishing. I work with authors who are publishing business books who aren't writers, who wouldn't think of themselves necessarily as primarily writers and creatives. They think of themselves as business people with intellectual property and ideas and ways of doing things that are helpful for other people. And many of them understand that having a book is really, really valuable in terms of visibility and profile and that kind of stuff. What they don't realize, but they really quickly come to appreciate, is that writing a book is an incredibly powerful process for getting clarity on actually what it is that you think, and the ability to abstract principles that perhaps have only been, implicit in your head or tacit knowledge because you've always used them in the room with people. And then they see connections and they find new ways of expressing things. So that whole process of writing, and it occurred to me embarrassingly late in the day that you don't have to be writing a book to benefit from all of that. You can be doing that, as I say, on a wet Wednesday. So there was that sort of professional interest, that sort of observation as a publisher that writing had this kind of intrinsic benefit for authors, as well as the whole, marvelous book thing. And then for me, there was a really, really personal moment where I sort of, early days of being an entrepreneur, woke up with the 3 a.m. panics, which I understand now because so many people have shared with me is not a kind of unique thing to me. Loads of people go through it. We've all been there, but nobody talks about it. And I didn't know what to do. And I was so sort of physically agitated, almost in a grip of a panic attack, that I couldn't do nothing. So I grabbed a piece of paper and started writing. And it was literally within a couple of minutes that I kind of self-regulated. My breathing had calmed down, and that sort of sensation of panic had subsided. And as I kept writing, I noticed that I was coming up with ideas, and I just thought that was incredible that I could go from this fight or flight sort of, lizard brain state to not just rational, but creative state, much more resourced, much more resilient, just through that process of, starting with basically a howl on the page and finishing up with, I wouldn't call it a plan exactly, but it was a really well-formed idea that I was able to implement the next day. And suddenly the cash flow crisis had a solution. And I just thought, my goodness, that is astonishing. Does anybody else know about this? And that's when I started researching the power of exploratory writing. Yeah.
I love that story. I'm so glad you told it. If you hadn't, I was going to ask you. It's one of the first bits in the book where you share that experience. It's really powerful because I think it reflects so many people's experiences. The 3 a.m. scaries is something that hits everybody at a point in their life, entrepreneur or not. I think it's, there's always something to worry about. And I think it's so powerful. And I've experienced things like that as well, when you feel like, I need to find a solution to this problem, and I don't know what it is, and it feels like I can't get to the end of it, and all of this. And actually just calming yourself and doing that writing is so powerful. And there's neuroscience behind it as well, isn't there? You talk about
Absolutely.
that in terms of the way that it works on the brain.
Yeah, and there's all sorts of neuroscience behind it. There's affect labeling, where when you actually you put language around, you name the things that you're feeling and you observe them in your body. Even that act reduces their power because it creates that sort of separation between you and the emotion that you're feeling and the sensation that you're feeling. And sometimes that's all you need. And then the other neuro trick, which I talk about in the book, should I go on to instinctive elaboration here? Because I think it's such a powerful...
Go for it.
Yeah, jumping around all over the place. I don't even care. So we have this neurological reflex mental reflex called instinctive elaboration, which sounds very fancy, but it. It's when someone asks you a question, and no matter how busy you are or what else you're trying to focus on, your brain just gets hijacked and you have to answer that question, which is massively unhelpful in the middle of a working day, by the way. Often, please stop wandering up to people and asking them questions when they're in the middle of something. But actually, you can use that in exploratory writing. So, I talked about carving out a little bit of time and space and a sort of blank piece of paper as a container for it all. But the thing that can get you going is a prompt, which sort of tricks your brain with that mental reflex into coming up with some answers. And if we just do it internally, we can come up with some really, really unhelpful questions like, why am I so rubbish? Why am I so disorganized? Why do I always get things wrong? And of course, your brain then scurries off trying to find answers to those massively unhelpful questions. But if you're doing it more consciously, then you can write at the top of your sheet of paper a much more helpful question like, I'm feeling really uncertain about this and I'm not sure why, what could be going on? And then you can write into that. And it just gives you a jumping off point. You might land miles and miles away from that, but at least you are using that mental reflex, giving yourself a bit of energy, writing a sprint. I always put a timer on because that gives you sort of full focus in a very short period of time, so you can write very fast, which helps get through the mental blocks and the self-censorship and all that kind of stuff. And those two things together, the prompt and then the short sprint of writing, I don't think I've ever finished, I literally never finished a writing sprint without coming up with something useful. It's amazing.
Wow, that is incredible. I really liked in your book as well, where you talk about using metaphors to stimulate your thinking and how you could use anything. So you give the example of you're out running and you saw a narrowboat and you use that to stimulate your thinking. So it actually doesn't even need to be a focused question. It's just something for your brain to think about, isn't it?
Exactly. It's that marvelous Brian Eno thing about, if you want to end up somewhere different, start somewhere different,
Yeah.
So if you're thinking about a problem and you've been thinking about it for a while, the chances are you've kind of worn a little rut in your brain and you're talking about it the same way and you're going to end up with the same kind of ideas coming up. What you can do is it's what I call a forced metaphor, which is where, and I suggest you sort of go outside because that's always good for the creativity as well. Find something random and go, how is this like my problem? And of course, your brain boggles for a minute and goes, well, it's not. What are you talking about? But if you push on past that, it's amazing how you will find a point of similarity or contrast or comparison. And because you've started somewhere completely different, you're coming in at the issue from a completely different angle, and that's when you can come up with fresh ideas and fresh insights, and perhaps also notice that the metaphors you were using to talk about that problem, which you probably didn't even know were metaphors, because metaphors just hide in plain sight all the time, weren't actually that helpful, or were helping you, were forcing you down a particular way of viewing it, and there are other ways of viewing it.
Mm. And I think metaphor is so powerful. I see it in the organisations that I work with. There was one I worked with a while ago, and all the leadership teams seem to tell the same story using the same metaphor. And it was usually boating related. I couldn't work out why. As an organisation, they had nothing to do with boating, but they always were describing themselves as super tankers or rowing as a team or all that sort of thing. And I was thinking, where has this come from? And then actually, when I dug down into it, they'd been on a course where they'd all been on the same course, and it had been used as a metaphor on the course, and it obviously really stuck with them. And now they were viewing the organisation through this lens, but none of them realised they were doing it. It wasn't until I said to them, "Why are you all, likening the organisation to a boat? Where has this come from?" And they were like, "Oh, okay, that course obviously had more of an impact on us than we thought."
And there's so much inherent in a metaphor, because it's so helpful in also, and I love metaphors, don't get me wrong, but if you're seeing your organization as a boat, there's an insularity in that. You are contained, and then there's everything beyond you that's probably going to operate against you at some points. And similarly, a lot of people see negotiation as a battle, or they see a team as a family. And if you come up against somebody with a different metaphor, or if you come up against a situation in which that metaphor isn't helpful, you'd better be able to go beyond it, find a new metaphor, or realize at least the limitations of your metaphor, or you're going to be trapped by it.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I think actually in this organisation, it was a bit of a problem that they were quite stuck in their ways, I suppose, and that this wasn't helping. I think if you're trying to affect change in an organisation and you see it as a super tanker, that's not going to be an environment that's easy to create change in. So yeah, that is a really good point.
You believe you are inherently not agile.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. I wanted to ask you about some of the things that you have discovered that help you in your exploratory writing. And I'm asking this from my own experience of exploring how to do this myself. And you and I have had this conversation before, that I always struggled with doing this and journaling, which I know is different, but that sort of activity, until I discovered that I work better writing on plain paper than I do on lined paper. And that took me probably about 5 years of experimenting to figure out, why is this not working for me? So for me, I find just any old plain paper, sometimes even just the back of a piece of paper that I've written something else on, works way better for me than having a lined notebook in front of me where it's like, right, now have some ideas. Have you had similar experiences yourself in your journey?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that you're right to draw that distinction between journaling and exploratory writing. And I think an awful lot of people go, "Oh no, I do this, I journal." And don't get me wrong, again, journaling, fantastic, really, really useful thing to do. But in a notebook, you are inevitably censoring yourself, because you know that you're keeping this, you're going to go back and read it, somebody else might find it one day, And so there is a level at which you are filtering stuff and putting stuff that is going to be worth reading down. And there's a level of pressure involved with that. And you have to do a lot of the processing in your brain before you put it down. And you're so right. If you grab a scruffy bit of paper, almost the scruffier the paper, the more back of a fag packet it looks, the more permission you have to write any old junk. And that's incredibly freeing. So one of the great affordances of exploratory writing, and handwriting in particular, is that you can drop into a number of different modes of mark making. So yes, you can write, and there is a connection between your hand and your brain, which is much more direct with the pen on the paper than any kind of keyboard or computer interface that we use. And it also looks more professional, which, as I say, gives you permission to be more messy. But you can also start to draw if you're a visual person, or you can write boxes around things and join them together with arrows, or underline something wildly, or write, "Yes, this," in the margin. Or there's just a kind of freedom around pen on paper that you do not get on a computer. And that freedom is magnified when it's unlined paper, and it's literally a blank canvas. So that makes sense to me. I actually prefer lined paper because it helps me just write more kind of freely, although I should probably try with online thinking about it. But I have absolutely no problem with disregarding the lines when necessary.
I think for me, what I found is I couldn't, and I
Yeah.
think it was that, oh, I've got to write neatly, exactly as you said, because it's in the lines, and there was just something about it. It was a real light bulb moment for me when
Yeah.
I didn't have any lined paper to hand, so just grabbed a scrappy piece of paper. It was probably something that had come off my printer, and I
Yes.
was writing on the back of it. I
Oh, I
suspect.
do a lot of that. No
Yeah.
paper is ever wasted in this house. Yeah.
And but the difference in how easy it felt was
Yeah.
amazing. And now whenever I'm prompting myself to do some writing with a prompt or thinking about something, I just grab a bit of paper and scribble on it. And I think that was the discovery for me that made it easier for me to do this as a practice.
That's brilliant. And I'm going to share that with other people, actually, because it's a useful one to think about. The other thing we've mentioned is the timer.
Yes.
And yeah, so I used to do 5 minutes. What I find with exploratory writing sprint, and I literally just set the timer so you don't have to think about the timer, it's going to go off. If you sit down and write with a kind of open-ended agenda, it's quite easy to get distracted. It's quite easy to think, oh, am I done yet? Or actually, that's probably it. If you've got a timer, you don't have to think about that. You just write until the timer goes off. And even if you think you've finished, you keep writing because that's when more ideas come. And that's when you kind of get the good stuff at the bottom of the barrel, the silt, going on a metaphor frenzy here. But also, it's only a short time. So you can do it. You've got permission to stop at the end, although you can, of course, carry on if you want. It takes at least a minute or two to really get into the flow. So for the first minute or two, you're slightly squirming, you're a bit self-conscious, you're writing things like, I have absolutely nothing to say, this makes no sense, why am I doing this, what a waste of time, what am I going to have for dinner? But you're bringing yourself back to that prompt each time. And then suddenly you kind of hit the gold. And it's interesting when you're watching people in a workshop do this, you see it happen. You see them kind of breathe differently and slightly sink into their chair and their eyes open. It's really interesting. And then they're away. And I discovered after talking to Julie Bolton, who wrote the book on reflective practice, the sort of standard textbook on this, she says 6 minutes. And it's only a minute longer than 5 minutes. It's still a really, really short period of time, a tenth of an hour if you measure your time that way, but you get a whole extra 60 seconds of the good stuff at the end. So it's disproportionately effective. Yeah.
That's amazing that 1 minute can make that difference. Yeah. Incredible. But that's my own experience, that definitely for the first couple of minutes, and particularly when you're doing this it's a new experience for you.
Yes.
You do sit there like, what the hell am I doing? And then
it feels odd and uncomfortable and unnatural. Yeah.
But I think that's really helpful to say, because I think what I guess what you wouldn't want people to think is that you sit down and immediately there's stuff pouring out of you from like 10 seconds in. It's even for the most experienced exploratory writer, it's not always like that, is it?
Yeah. And it's like, I don't know if you're a runner and you're listening, then, the first few minutes of every run are always a bit like, oh, this is rubbish. I hate running. Can't get the breathing right. And then you settle into the rhythm of it. Or if you're not a runner, another metaphor that I often use is like sort of pumping one of those old well handles. The first few pumps, you're not really getting anything. You're just, you're priming the pump and you're getting maybe a sort of trickle of sludge out. And then suddenly the good stuff comes, but it doesn't come unless you do that priming.
I think it's really interesting because I think my own experience is that there were so many questions when I first started doing it, but also, have I written enough?
Yeah.
And I think having that timer really helps with that, because you can then remind yourself, well, it doesn't matter because you just got to keep going until the timer goes off. There's no limits, there's no word count. But I find that in my own writing, when I'm writing normally, that I'm always thinking about, well, how many words do I have to write and when will it be done? And I think it's quite nice to be
Can I stop yet?
Can I finish? Maybe that's just how I feel at the moment, but it's I think it is very different from that process, and you can switch off that side of your brain totally by having the timer. I wonder if wondering out loud, whether there's a neuroscience basis for the 6 minutes, because it's like the Pomodoro technique is 6 minutes as well, isn't it? I just wonder.
No, it's 25 minutes for the Pomodoro.
Is it 25? Oh, okay. Sure, yeah, but it's just it's interesting whether that there is something about the brain and attention, whether it is that sort of that amount of time.
There may be a neurological basis for this. For me, more than 6 minutes and my hand drops off. There's only a certain amount of time that you can write longhand for without actually starting to feel cramping. So yeah.
And we're not used to doing it anymore.
No.
Oh, that's the thing I find in any sort of handwriting now. It is quite exhausting.
Yeah.
So what
But it's
else?
sort of,
Other top tips have you got then?
so we've got the timer, we've got the scruffy paper, we've got the prompt. I think it's not a tip for how to do it exactly, but it's just a kind of another thought about how to use it. If you've got to do something, write a report or a difficult email or a novel, whatever it is that's in front of you, a bout of exploratory writing before you start is a really good limber up. It just sort of gets you thinking. And the other thing that it's really, really good as a preparation for is using generative AI. So I think as more and more people get more comfortable using AI daily in work, and it's fabulous. I mean, again, love generative AI. It's such a brilliant research tool. It's a sparring partner. It's all those great things. It's a fabulous tool, but it's a terrible master. And if you delegate your thinking to it, then you're cheating yourself and you're cheating the people, who are reading the output of whatever it is you're creating. So if you start with some exploratory writing around what's important, what the big questions are, what they mean for you, what they mean for the people that you're writing for, you're going to be in a much better position to engineer a prompt or to evaluate the outcome of a generative AI conversation, for the want of a better word, rather than just giving it a generic prompt and taking what comes out and making it good enough. So I think that kind of human computer it's a very good way of accessing your human intelligence, I guess is what I'm saying, as a partner for artificial intelligence.
That's really interesting because I think the whole area of generative AI is fascinating in terms of writing generally. And I'm sure we could have a really long conversation about it, a whole other podcast.
Oh, yeah. There's a huge amount of stuff going on in publishing. Yes, absolutely.
It's really fascinating. I did another podcast episode a while ago with Angus Fletcher, who is professor of story science in an American university. And he has had a lot of discussion about AI's ability to create narrative and story, and is it even possible? And there's examples of where the whole works of Jane Austen have been fed into an AI, and it's come out with a chapter which actually, to the person who's unfamiliar with Jane Austen, could look like Jane Austen.
Absolutely.
I think it's really fascinating, but you're right. It has to be a tool for us to use, much like we would Google something in the past. It's that thing, but you have to approach it with the question in mind you want it to answer. So that idea of doing your own creativity first and then putting that in, that's really interesting. And interesting that actually you see that as a good part of research and reflective practice,
Yes.
Something else. I think that's really interesting.
Yeah, I think it's, there's two sort of really unhelpful equal responses to AI. One is to be just terrified of it and not use it because you don't trust it and you think it's a bad thing. And the other is to just delegate your thinking to it and get to the, it's actually often, it's not the output that's the important thing. It's the process that you go through to get there that's really important. So I think, using it intelligently, rigorously, transparently, all of that is really important.
And you write in your book as well, and you've mentioned it here before about this idea of retreating, so going somewhere different to do your writing. And you mentioned the outdoors, but out of the office, anywhere in particular. Is that something you think is quite important in this process?
I don't think it's vital. I think you can get a huge amount of really good exploratory writing done wherever you are right now. So don't use it as an excuse. Oh, well, I'd love to do some exploratory writing, but unfortunately, I can't get to a beach hut in Thailand right now. No, just do it. And there's something about putting yourself in a new situation which everybody knows this. You have your best thoughts out on a run or on the train or even in the shower. It's when you get away from your desk that your brain starts to just operate a little bit differently, a little bit more creatively. So again, lean into that. Take yourself off for a coffee in a cafe and write on a pad of paper there. Or I'm doing a wild writing retreat with a friend of mine who's a bushcraft instructor, and we're going to be looking at how we can just be in nature and then bring in the writing and resource yourself a little bit more and just unhook yourself from the kind of relentless pressure of stuff that really doesn't actually matter that much when you kind of get back into nature and start looking at trees and reconnect with really stuff that does matter. So that can be hugely helpful. Getting oxygen, getting your legs moving, walking outside, all of that gives you better quality thinking than just shutting yourself in an office in four walls and writing all day.
I get some of my best thoughts when I'm swimming because I think it's that I don't have to think about swimming because I know how to do it. So the first few lengths inevitably is exactly how you described with running. I hate this. I've forgotten how to do it. Why are all these other people here? It's etc. And then suddenly that side of your brain switches off, and then I get so many good ideas. There's so many times when I've had to scurry out of the pool, go and grab my phone, write something down, put it back in my locker, and then get back in the pool again.
This is where running beats swimming. You just have to stop right there.
I know. It's very impractical.
I do have a friend who keeps a diver's notepad in the shower because she was so tired of, having a brilliant idea and then forgetting it by the time she got dried that she actually put the notepad in there.
Oh, I love that. I could do that at the end of the pool. I mean, everyone would think I was a bit mad, but they might think I had like my training schedule on it and would think I was better than I actually am. I love that.
That's a great idea.
Keep a notebook next to the bed. I do, because I'm a big one waking up in the night with ideas as well.
Never knowingly without a pen and paper, honestly, me.
Yeah. Likewise, every handbag, every bag, all the rooms in the house have something to make a note of things. And I like what you said earlier about mark making. I think that really resonated for me, thinking about writing these notes down whenever you get them. It doesn't have to be writing, and I think that's really powerful.
And I think if you are a visual person, and frankly, honestly, even if you're not, I talk a lot in the book about visual thinking and just getting comfortable using, I guess a mind map is the entry level point. Everybody understands how a mind map works. And it's so much more freewheeling and creative and easy to just start and freely associate than if you were trying to write in a linear way, on a piece of paper. So experiment with that. If you can do a mind map, fantastic. Could you maybe do sort of cause and effect diagram, or can you organize ideas and show roughly what a process flow through what's happening is? Because every time you visualize an idea or a problem, again, you get a new insight on it. It's like applying a new metaphor to it. But the brilliant side effect of visualizing stuff is that when you land it, when you go, that's it, that's what's happening here, you can show it to somebody else and they get it immediately. It's such a powerful communication tool. We're such visual people. We have to process text. It takes us a lot longer. But if you can show me a picture of something, I'm there. I've instantly got it. So it's really worth, both for what it will do for your own clarity and quality of thinking, and also for explaining something to other people, to just experiment with a bit more drawing rather than writing in terms of your mark making.
That's really interesting. It's reminded me actually of a piece of work I did a few years ago with an organisation, and I was doing some focus groups and we were talking about the organisation and how it was changing. And, when you get the feeling that the group's a bit stuck and needed a bit of help. And so I got them to draw, and gave them each a big sheet of flip up chart paper, some pens. And I just said, draw what it feels like to be here right now. And it was amazing. And it was like opening of the floodgates. You mentioned earlier about this hidden, so much stuff came out, and you could see how different they felt. It wasn't like pulling things out of them, it was just pouring out of them these ideas. Fascinating.
There is something incredibly empowering, I think, about a blank sheet of paper. As I say, the scruffier the better.
Yes.
I think when you're thinking, you can only have one thought in your brain at a time. And when you, as you say, when you pour it out, it's captured. What you've already thought is captured. It's there. And then you can build on it. And you can, I'm sort of exploratory writing, I think, is a very private thing, because that idea about not having to censor, not having to perform or worry about judgment is really, really important. But when you're at the next stage, when you're a bit clearer on what it is that you think or the idea that you need to pursue, that's the point at which you expand that thinking rather than the exploratory stage or in the expansive stage. And you show an early output to somebody, or you get them to comment on it. You say, what do you think about this? And again, that builds and builds. And it can take quite a long time of that, private exploring, small trusted group expanding, building on that before you're ready to kind of explain or expound an idea in a much more public way.
And I think that point about the private nature of exploratory writing is an important one. And one of the things that certainly helped me with doing it is the idea that I don't have to show this to anyone. Yeah. In actual fact, I probably shouldn't show it to anybody.
No, please don't. Yeah, and you know what? Don't even keep it. I think
No.
that's really important. No, honestly, tear it up, put it in the recycle bin,
Mm.
or shred it if you can't trust the people around you, because you have to know that that is
Yeah.
absolutely private, and you can say things that you would never ever say out loud because that's where they need to be. You need to look at them, you need to be able to see them, you need to go, okay, if that's how I feel, that's going to be impacting how I behave. Because, our behaviors, our actions, that they come from decisions which are governed by emotions. And so often we don't get down to that emotional level and really acknowledge how irrationally angry we are about this, or why this behavior is so intolerable to us, because it's actually violating something that is a closely held value of ours.
Mm.
And it's only when you see that, because you've written on the page, that you get a sense of, okay, this is why I'm feeling like this. This is why I'm having this problem with this relationship or this behavior. And therefore, this is what I can do about it.
And I think that is a good point. And I've experienced that recently myself when I saw something on social media that someone I knew had written, and it made me really angry. And I didn't really know why, because it was innocuous. It wasn't anything terrible, but I was furious about it. And I was like, why am I so angry about this? And then I did actually sit down with a blank sheet of paper and wrote, and it did help me get to the bottom of why it was. And I guess that's a different way of using exploratory writing, other than having a particular question you want to answer, or a problem you want to solve. It's almost like writing down what I feel, which then
Yes,
helps you understand why you might be feeling that
exactly.
way.
I call it sense making. And it is a
Yes.
really, really powerful way of doing it. And I guess related to that too is inquiring of yourself.
Mm.
So, we tend to think of ourselves as rational, sort of, monolithic, I have this opinion about this thing. Of course, that's absolute nonsense. When you are resourced and at your best, you might feel one way about something, but there's a little piece of you that is actually quite fearful about it. There's another piece that's curious or or resistant. There's actually, you are multitudes, as Walt Whitman said. Do I contradict myself? Very well, I contradict myself. I am, what is it? I am wise, I contain multitudes, something like that.
Yeah.
And we all contain multitudes, and most of the voices in our heads never really get a hearing,
Mm.
because we have, maybe it's fear, or maybe it's our sense of ourselves as leaders or whatever, that kind of shut down the stuff that doesn't tally with that. So you can almost invite the different parts of you, the different responses in you, to just take a turn of saying how they feel about something. It sounds really woo-woo. I'm aware of that as I speak, but actually it's a really great way of understanding your response, and particularly if there's a contradictory nature in your response, or you feel uneasy about it, of understanding what's going on there, acknowledging particularly the fear, which, if unacknowledged, can be quite sabotaging, and having a kind of better sense of meeting the needs of all the different parts of you. So if your fearful part, if you squish it down, it tends to be quite unhelpful. But you can mitigate it, or you can put in place some factors that will allow that fear to feel heard and seen, and therefore quiet down, so that you can move on with whatever it is you want to do.
And I can imagine where that, as a process and as a tool, would be so powerful for leaders. You mentioned them earlier, but I see it all the time that there's an unwillingness sometimes in organizations for leaders to ask questions in case, or invite questions in case they're asked something they don't know the answer to. There's that huge fear of not being the all-knowing one. And it's a cultural thing, I think, that we expect our leaders to know everything, which is unreasonable of us, because no one knows everything. But
it's not just unreasonable, it's dangerous.
Yes.
If you expect your leader to have all the answers, you are limiting what you can do as an organization to one person's. Where's the sense in that? We need leaders who are prepared to acknowledge the limits of their own knowledge, and to bring in people who can help, and to invite questions and say, that is a great question. We need to we need to explore that and invite people into that. And I think as long as we are, as leaders, expecting ourselves to have the answers and frightened of the questions, and as followers expecting our leaders to have their answers, we are self-limiting.
Exactly. And I can see exploratory writing as something so important for leaders to do with themselves to uncover some of these beliefs that are driving their behavior, because I see it constantly. And you're right. We should be okay as leaders to say, oh, I don't know the answer to that. I like the question though. I'm going to go away and find out. But that seems to be really impossible in some
Yeah.
organizations to happen. And I could see a really important exercise for leaders to do to explore with themselves why they feel that way, and to really uncover it, because it's dangerous, as you say, and it's limiting, and it stops organizations from moving forward. And
Yeah.
in relation to my own work, it creates this sort of them and us attitude, where you've got the leaders who know all the answers, the followers, for want of a better word, who seem to be asking difficult questions and who are being annoying, and it then leads to this sort of battle in organisations, which is really unhelpful.
And maybe once you recognize the value of the question as the input, maybe we can get better as organizations at inviting people to come up with really, really good questions. So, and we don't reward that really at the moment.
No.
As you say, they tend to be, but I think actually that's what's going to move us forward, isn't it?
Definitely.
But as a personal practice, if you're a leader, I think exploratory writing is really, really important, because actually there are very few places where you can air your uncertainties without frightening the horses.
I was literally just going to say that, because I think that is part of the problem, that so many leaders, it's very lonely, and there's no space for them to go to do exactly that. So yeah, this is the tool for you to help you process some of that, because you can't sit there in a board meeting and talk about how worried you are about everything.
Exactly. And how you just don't
equally,
know this, and you're uncertain. Yeah, it's not a good look.
it isn't. I mean, I would argue it is good to share if you've got a new strategy or something. It's good to talk about what excites you and what you are fearful about, but you do have to do that in context of how you're going to deal with those fears, rather than just telling everyone that you're scared of it.
Exactly. As the leader, you have to ultimately take responsibility for the impact that what you say is going to have on the people around you, which means that you are constantly performing in some way and having a space that's absolutely, I mean, what it's like really, I guess, is having a really good coach on call 24/7.
Yes.
And even the best coach isn't going to thank you at 3 a.m, if you so not unless you're paying them a lot of money. So knowing that actually what a coach is doing is giving you really good questions and a space in which you can trust that you have time and freedom to explore things that you don't yet know the answers to. I mean, that really is essentially what a coaching conversation is, isn't it? A good coach isn't going to give you answers. They're going to be giving you good questions and letting you answer them for yourself. You can do that with a piece of paper.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's a wonderful way of looking at it, because people are familiar with the idea of a coach, but perhaps less familiar if they haven't done this before with exploratory writing. But it's the same thing, isn't it? It's you being your own coach. I
Yeah.
think that's brilliant. So, if someone was going to do this for the first time, what would you suggest? How would they? I mean, obviously, buy your book straight away.
Yes.
Would be what I would
I'm glad
recommend.
you said that.
Read the book, because it tells you everything you need to know. But if people want to get started, what is it that they need? How should they build it into their practice?
I think just give it a try, just get yourself somewhere comfortable, grab a scruffy sheet of paper and a pen, think about something that's on your mind, and maybe give yourself a minute to come up with a question that feels like it's got some legs, a question that you don't know the answer to. For goodness sake, don't start with a closed question or a question that you already know the answer to. There's quite a lot of, sort of all-purpose prompts in the back of here if you really can't come up with anything specific. I always find what's most important about this. It's a really good one, because it's so open-ended. Who could help with this? What do I really want here? What advice do I give to others I really need to take myself? What's bringing life today? There's loads of different sort of ones in there that you can use at any point. Set a timer for 6 minutes. Make sure you're not going to be disturbed. And just write, and don't stop. So even if you find yourself writing absolute twaddle, or I don't know what Alison was talking about, this is rubbish, I don't like it at all, this feels really uncomfortable, just write those thoughts and trust the process, and don't stop until the timer goes off. And then when it does go off, shake your hand out and just look back over what you've written, and you'll know by then. But just pick out the bits that seem to you significant or worth investigating further. And then how you capture those is up to you, because you're going to throw this writing away. So you might want to put it on a to-do list, or write it as a prompt for a future sprint, or write an email immediately to somebody saying, oh, I've just had this idea, can we talk about it? Whatever it is you need to do. But, make sure you've captured what you need to save and then bin the rest. And also, actually, importantly, celebrate it. Yeah. Even if you come up with almost nothing, if you tried it, if you wrote for 6 minutes, give yourself a real kind of woo, or a pat on the back, or whatever it is you do, because the way that we form habits is the reward loop. So if you did what you said you were going to do, for goodness sake, give your brain a little bit of a reward. I mean, I'm not saying go and drink a bottle of Prosecco or something, but you just, a little kind of high five in the mirror or something. And that cements the loop. And now you're like, oh, when I do this, I feel good. And that means you're more likely to do it again. So don't beat yourself up ever. If you're trying to, get a habit going, if you blow it, it doesn't matter. Try it again and just really, when you get it, reinforce it, because that's what makes us, that's what makes habits stick is that reward loop.
Yeah. And making it easy for yourself. So
and super easy and tiny, yes, which is why 6 minutes is brilliant.
Yeah, as you said, everyone can find 6 minutes in their day. And I think that's the thing. If you find yourself rebelling against it, I haven't got time, then you just remind yourself, no, it's 6 minutes.
It's 6 minutes, of course I've got time, yes.
Something's gone wrong in your life if you don't have 6 minutes to do something.
Yeah, in which case your question should be, why on earth can't I find 6 minutes in a day?
Exactly.
But I would break it down. BJ Fogg's tiny habits kind of research says take it tiny. If you're going to floss your teeth, floss one tooth. Unfortunately, there's kind of no point doing 30 seconds of exploratory writing because it won't really get you anywhere. That's just like doing one push of the pump handle and, thinking, oh, well, that didn't work. You really do have to give it, I'd say at least 5 minutes. But that's pretty tiny, right?
Yeah, and I think that you could build that into every day. And I think you've probably read Atomic Habits. I'm sure you have.
Yes, James Clear, of course.
Book, yeah. But he talks about linking habits together. So
yes, habit stacking.
You have your coffee and then you do your writing. It's
exactly
that sort of thing to make it part of your daily practice.
Or what somebody said last week in a writing workshop to me, which I thought was genius. I make my coffee and then I have to put cold water in it because she takes her coffee black to make it the right temperature. So all I'm going to do is just make my coffee. And while it cools, I'm going to do 6 minutes of exploratory writing and then I'm going to drink my coffee and that's my reward.
Oh, I like it.
Yeah.
That would work for me because I drink tea without milk.
There you go.
Oh, I'm going to nick
You're
that.
welcome.
Thank you. And thank you to the participant of your workshop. It has been so wonderful talking to you today about all of this. I know I felt really inspired when I read your book, and I'm sure everyone listening to this will feel the same. So much practical advice there for people. Where can people find out more about your work and what you're doing?
Oh, thanks, Susanne. So it's AlisonJones.com is my personal website. If you want to find out about the business books, it's practicalinspiration.com. And I host a podcast called the Extraordinary Business Book Club, which is extraordinarybusinessbooks.com. Or, find it on Apple or wherever you source your podcasts.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I've really enjoyed speaking to you. Thank you for coming on.
It's been a pleasure. I've really enjoyed it. Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Change Stories podcast. I love this conversation and I hope you did too. Thanks as ever to my wonderful guests and to Pete Morgan at Monkey Pants Productions for making the podcast sound amazing. If you want to find out more about this or any other episodes of Change Stories, go to www.changestories.co.uk where you will find all the episodes and show notes. If you have enjoyed listening, please rate and review the Change Stories podcast on your podcast listening platform. And do please let me know if you have ideas or requests for future episodes. You can contact me and find out more about change and storytelling on my website, www.feldsparconsulting.com. Thanks again for joining in with the Change Stories conversation.
This has been a Monkey Pants Productions podcast.